Gene Park stood in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan watching women in designer gowns drift past him like expensive ghosts, and he felt absolutely nothing. 32 years old, 6'3", custom Armani suit hiding tattoos that told stories of a life most people only saw in movies. Dark eyes that had witnessed too much violence to ever look truly soft. Heir to the Park crime family that controlled half of New York's underground. And he was bored out of his mind at this. Charity fundraiser for Columbia University scholarships, where Manhattan's elite pretended to care about education, while really just networking and showing off their wealth. His business partner Carter kept nudging him, kept pointing out models and heiresses who were clearly angling for his attention, kept saying, "That one, definitely that one." But Gene just sipped champagne and planned his escape, because beautiful women who wanted his money had stopped being interesting around the same time he'd taken over his father's empire at 25 and learned that pretty faces often hid the ugliest intentions. The orchestra played something classical. The chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, and Gene was about to leave when the crowd shifted near the champagne tables, and that's when he saw her. She wasn't a guest, wasn't wearing a gown, wasn't trying to catch anyone's attention at all. Just a waitress in the standard black and white uniform serving drinks with a grace that came from practice, not performance. Her dark skin glowing under the soft lights. Her natural hair pulled back in an elegant bun. And when she smiled at something a guest said, actually smiled like she meant it, Gene forgot how to breathe. Time didn't just slow. It stopped completely. The music faded. The crowd disappeared. And there was only her. Only that smile that lit up her entire face for 3 seconds before vanishing back into professional neutrality. And Gene felt something crack open in his chest that he'd thought was permanently sealed. He moved before his brain caught up, cutting through the crowd with a kind of purposeful stride that made people instinctively step aside. But she turned and walked toward the service entrance before he could reach her, and Gene stood there like an idiot staring at where she'd been. "Did you just chase a waitress across the room?" Carter appeared at his elbow, eyes wide with shock. "I didn't chase anyone," Gene said, but his voice sounded wrong. "You walked past 30 supermodels and sprinted after service staff. Are you having a stroke?" Carter pulled out his phone. "Should I call a doctor?" Gene couldn't explain it, couldn't put into words how that smile had shattered something inside him. How for 3 seconds he'd seen something real in a room full of beautiful lies. How he suddenly needed to know her name more than he needed his next breath. "Find out who she is," Gene said quietly. And Carter knew that tone, knew it meant this wasn't negotiable. "The waitress?" "Gene, you can't be serious." "Name, address, where she goes to school. Everything. I want it by morning." Gene interrupted, his eyes still fixed on that service door. Carter stared at him like he'd grown a second head, but nodded. Already texting their people. Already making it happen, because when Gene Park wanted something the universe bent to accommodate. Gene turned back to the gala. To the 30 models still circulating like sharks, still performing, still trying to catch his attention, and felt nothing but impatience to leave, to find the woman who'd smiled like sunshine and disappeared like smoke, and he had no idea that woman was about to turn his carefully controlled world completely upside down, had no idea she'd make him question everything he'd built, everything he'd become, had no idea that one smile would lead to the most dangerous thing he'd ever done, which was fall in love. If you love this opening, wait until you see what happens when they actually meet. Smash that like button, and let's dive into Zara's world, because trust me, this girl is about to rock his entire existence. Her name was Zara Mitchell, and she had exactly 2 hours left on her shift before she could go home, take off these heels that were destroying her feet, collapse in a bed in her tiny Brooklyn apartment she shared with 2 roommates and a cat named Zeus who hated everyone equally, and maybe, just maybe, get 4 hours of sleep before her morning shift at the campus cafe started at 6 a.m. The Waldorf gig paid $28 an hour plus tips, which was good money for serving champagne, to people who spent more on a single bracelet than Zara made in a month. But her feet disagreed violently with that assessment, and she was pretty sure one of the guests had just tried to slip his business card in her apron with a wink that made her skin crawl. Card immediately dropped in the nearest trash, because Zara had 3 rules for surviving these events, which were smile like you mean it. Don't make eye contact longer than necessary. And never ever accept anything from men who looked at you like you were part of the appetizer menu. She was 24, a finance major at Columbia taking classes part-time, because that's all she could afford. Working 3 jobs to pay tuition her scholarship didn't cover. And some days like today, when her feet ached and entitled rich people treated her like furniture, she wondered if she was chasing a dream that didn't exist, but giving up wasn't in her DNA. So she kept moving, kept smiling, kept believing that eventually something would break her way. "Excuse me, miss." An older woman in diamonds gestured imperiously, and Zara moved toward her with her professional smile firmly in place, delivered champagne, received no thank you in return, and moved on because invisible was safest, and Zara had learned that lesson the hard way growing up in Oakland, watching her mother work 2 jobs just to keep them fed. She delivered her last tray and headed back toward the service entrance for a refill when she felt it, that prickling awareness of being watched, and she glanced over her shoulder to see him, tall and devastatingly handsome in a way that should be illegal. Dark eyes locked on her with an intensity that stole her breath, standing in the middle of the ballroom like he'd forgotten where he was. And for just a second their eyes met across the distance, and something electric passed between them. Then Zara blinked, shook it off, and pushed through the staff door into the bright fluorescent reality of the service corridor, because men who looked like that and stood in ballrooms like this didn't notice women like her except as objects to use and discard. "Girl, you okay?" her co-worker Riley asked, loading her tray. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Just tired," Zara lied, but her heart was racing, still caught on the way that man had looked at her like she was the only person in a room full of hundreds. 20 more minutes, and we can take a break," Riley said sympathetically. "Rich people tip better when they're drunk, so smile pretty, and let's make this rent money." Zara laughed, grabbed her refilled tray, pushed back through the door, and the man was gone, disappeared into the crowd, and she told herself the weird flutter in her chest was relief, not disappointment. What Zara didn't know was that across the city, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Jean Park was staring at a file containing her entire life, name, address, work history, class schedule, everything, and he was already planning how to see her again, and neither of them was ready for what came next. Zara's morning shift at the Columbia Campus Cafe started at 6 a.m., which meant she was running on 3 hours of sleep and pure caffeine, when the door chimed at 6:15 and Jean Park walked in looking completely out of place in dark jeans and a leather jacket among the sleep-deprived students and professors, his dark eyes scanning the room until they landed on her behind the counter, and Zara almost dropped the espresso she was making. "What can I get you?" she asked, keeping her voice professional, even though alarm bells were ringing in her head because this couldn't be coincidence. This man from the Waldorf showing up at her campus cafe. "Coffee," Jean said, and his voice was deeper than she'd expected, rough like he hadn't slept either. "Black, no sugar." Zara rang him up, made his coffee, slid it across the counter, and when their fingers brushed during the exchange, she felt electricity shoot up her arm. "You were at the Waldorf last night," Jean said, not a question. "I work events sometimes," Zara said carefully. "Did I forget to give you your champagne or something?" "No," Jean said, and something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "I wanted to see you again." The honesty of it startled her. "Why?" "Because you smiled and it was the most real thing I'd seen in months," Jean said simply. Zara's breath caught, because that was either the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, or the most effective line she'd ever heard, and she couldn't tell which. "I smile at everyone," she said. "It's part of the job." "Not like that," Jean said. "Not like you meant it." Before Zara could respond, her manager called her name, needing help at the morning rush, and she had to turn away, had to focus on orders and customers and not the man who'd somehow found her cafe. But when she looked back, Jean was still there, sitting at a corner table, coffee untouched, just watching her work with that same intense focus from the gala. Her shift ended at noon, and Zara changed out of her apron expecting him to be gone, but Jean was waiting outside, leaning against a black Mercedes that probably cost more than her student loans. "This is creepy," Zara said bluntly, even though her traitorous heart was doing backflips. "You showing up at my work, waiting for me. It's stalker behavior." "You're right," Jean agreed immediately. "I'm sorry, I just couldn't stop thinking about you, and I wanted to see if that moment at the gala was real, or if I'd imagined it." "What moment?" Zara asked. "The one where time stopped," Jean said quietly, and there was something so vulnerable in his expression that Zara's defenses cracked just a little. "Have lunch with me. Just lunch. 1 hour. If you hate it, I'll leave you alone forever." Zara knew she should say no, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost desperate, almost lonely, and she'd always been a sucker for strays. 1 hour, she heard herself say. "And you're buying." Lunch turned into 3 hours at a small Thai place near campus, talking about everything and nothing, and Zara discovered that beneath the expensive clothes Jean was funny and self-deprecating and carried sadness in his eyes he tried to hide. "What do you do?" Zara asked suddenly, For work, you never said. Jin's expression shuddered. Business, import-export, family company. That's vague, Zara observed. It's complicated, Jean said. Is it legal? Zara asked bluntly. Jean was quiet for a long moment. Mostly. And there it was. I should go, Zara said, standing. Wait. Jean caught her hand. Let me explain. Then explain, Zara challenged. Truth, right now or I walk. Jean looked at her, and she saw him decide to risk everything. My family runs one of the largest Korean crime organizations in New York, he said quietly. I inherited it when I was 25. I'm trying to make it legitimate, but that takes time. I've done things I'm not proud of, but Zara, I swear I would never hurt you. Stop, Zara interrupted because her world was tilting. I need to think. Take all the time you need. Jean said, but know this. From the moment you smiled, something changed. I changed, and I'm not giving up unless you tell me to. He left and Zara stood there, trying to figure out if she'd dodge a bullet or walked away from something extraordinary. And when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number saying, for what it's worth, I walked past 30 perfect women and saw nothing. Then I saw you. That has to mean something. She knew she was in trouble. The kind of trouble that could either save her or destroy her. Zara didn't sleep that night. Kept staring at Jin's message. Kept replaying his confession. Kept thinking about the way he'd looked at her like she was worth risking everything for. And by morning she'd made a decision that terrified her, which was to give him a chance. To see where this impossible thing could go. Because walking away felt like cutting off a piece of her soul. She texted him at 7 a.m. saying, coffee. Same place. We need to talk. And Jean showed up 20 minutes later looking like he'd been awake all night too. Hope and fear warring in his expression. I'm scared, Zara said when they sat down. Of you. Of this. Of how fast I'm falling. My brother was killed in gang violence 5 years ago, and I swore I'd never have anything to do with that world. I understand, Jean said, already preparing to let her go. But, Zara continued, you told me the truth when you could have lied. You're trying to change things, and I think maybe we could try this. Honest, no secrets, no lies, just us figuring it out. Jin's smile was beautiful and relieved, and Zara realized she was in so much deeper than she'd thought. They spent the next 3 weeks in a bubble, stolen hours between her classes and shifts. Jean showing up at the cafe every morning, taking her to dinner at small restaurants where nobody knew him, teaching her about Korean food and culture, listening to her dreams about graduating and starting her own financial consulting firm. And Zara fell harder every single day. Fell for the way he looked at her like she hung the stars. Fell for how he remembered every small thing she mentioned. Fell for the man he was trying to become, not the man his family had made him. But bubbles always burst. Zara was working her evening shift at a bar in Brooklyn when 3 men in expensive suits walked in, sat at her section, and when she approached to take their order, the older one smiled coldly and said, "You're Jean Park's girl." Her blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about," Zara said. "Don't play stupid," the man said. "Jin's father sent us with a message. Break up with Jean, or there will be consequences. Accidents happen to girls who don't listen. We know where you work, where you live, where your mother lives in California." Zara's hand shook as she set down her notepad. "Tell Jin's father I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress. I'm not worth this." "That's the smart choice," the man said, standing. "End it tomorrow or we'll end it for you." They left and Zara stood there feeling her entire world crumble because this was it. This was the reality she'd been afraid of, the violence she'd sworn to avoid. And no matter how much she loved Jean, she couldn't risk her family, couldn't risk her life, couldn't be the reason people got hurt. She called Jean that night, voice shaking. "Your father's men came to my work," she said. "They threatened me, threatened my mom. Jean, I can't do this. Where are you?" Jin's voice was deadly calm. "I'm coming right now. You're not safe." "I'm not safe anywhere in your world," Zara said through tears. "Don't you see? Your father will never accept me. He'll keep escalating. Someone will get hurt. Then I'll deal with my father," Jean said. "Zara, please just wait for me." "No," Zara interrupted. "I'm sorry, Jean. I'm so sorry, but I can't risk my family. Can't be the reason you go to war with your own father. This was beautiful, but it's over. Don't do this," Jean said and his voice cracked. "Don't let him win." "He already won," Zara whispered. "Goodbye, Jean." She hung up, blocked his number, and collapsed sobbing because doing the right thing had never felt so much like dying. And across the city, Gene stared at his phone, feeling something inside him shatter before he stood, grabbed his keys, and drove to his father's office with murder in his eyes. And neither of them knew that this ending was really just the beginning. Gene walked into his father's office at midnight, past security who knew better than to stop him when he looked like this, and found his father at his desk going over ledgers like he hadn't just destroyed his son's entire world. "You threatened her," Gene said, voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You sent men to her workplace." His father looked up, expression cold. "I protected you from a distraction. She was making you weak, making you forget who you are. She was everything," Gene said, "and you took her from me. She was a waitress," his father dismissed, "a nobody who would have dragged you down, compromised everything we've built. You'll thank me eventually." "I will never forgive you for this," Gene said quietly, and the certainty in his voice made his father's eyes narrow. "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more," Gene said. "You taught me that power without purpose is worthless, that family is everything. But you just showed me that you don't understand either of those things. You only understand control." "Don't be dramatic," his father said. "You'll get over the girl. Find someone suitable, someone who understands our world." "No," Gene said, "I won't, because loving her showed me who I want to be, and it's not this, it's not you." He left before his father could respond, and spent the next 3 months transforming everything, pouring his pain into purpose, using his position to systematically dismantle every illegal operation the Park family ran, transitioning everything to legitimate business, real estate, investments, legal enterprises. And when his father had a massive heart attack from the stress, Gene felt nothing but grim satisfaction. His father survived, but the doctor was clear, which was retire or die. And suddenly Gene had complete control with no one left to stop him from becoming who he should have been all along. He opened community centers in Brooklyn and Queens, started scholarship funds for kids like Zara, who worked 3 jobs to afford education, donated millions to Columbia's financial aid program. And every single thing he did was in her honor, even though she'd never know. Even though she'd moved and changed her number and disappeared so completely it was like she'd never existed. Carter watched him work himself to exhaustion and finally said, "You need to move on. She's gone." "I know," Gene said, but he couldn't move on when part of his soul had walked away with her. Across the city, Zara was drowning, working her jobs, going to classes, existing but not living, and everything reminded her of Gene. Every coffee she made, every Thai restaurant she passed, every tall man in a dark jacket made her heart stop before she remembered he was gone. Her roommate found her crying one night and just held her. "I did the right thing," Zara said. "So why does it feel like I'm dying?" "Because you loved him," Riley said gently. "And love doesn't care about right or wrong." Then finals week came and Zara was studying in the Columbia Library at 2 a.m. when she saw it. A plaque on the wall announcing the new Park Family Scholarship Fund for students working multiple jobs to afford tuition. Full ride, no strings attached, and her hand shook as she read the eligibility requirements, which described her exactly. She pulled up her phone, searched Jin's name, and found articles about his transformation, about the community centers, about the complete legitimization of his family's business, about the man who'd walked away from crime and chosen redemption. And Zara realized he'd done it. He'd actually changed everything, had become who he'd said he wanted to be. But it was too late. They were over. She made her choice and had to live with it, even if living with it felt impossible. What Zara didn't know was that in 3 days, fate was about to give them one more chance. Gene was teaching financial literacy at one of his community centers in Brooklyn, something he did twice a week now, finding more purpose in helping kids understand money than he'd ever found in making it. When someone knocked on the classroom door and he looked up to see Zara standing there, thinner than before, exhaustion in her eyes, but that same strength in her spine, and the world stopped spinning. "Hi," she said, voice barely above a whisper, and Gene dismissed the class early, didn't care about protocol, just needed to talk to her, needed to understand why she was here after 6 months of silence. They sat on the steps outside, the same place they'd sat for their first real conversation, and the afternoon sun was gentle. "I saw the scholarship fund," Zara said, "and the articles about what you've done. Gene, you actually did it." "I had to," Gene said quietly. "After losing you, I realized that building something on violence wasn't worth it. You showed me there was a better way even if I couldn't have you." "Your father?" she asked. "Retired, moved to Connecticut, doctor's orders. The business is completely legitimate now. No more gray areas. No more threats. Silence fell heavy between them. Why are you here? Jean asked, because he couldn't handle the hope rising in his chest that might get crushed. Because I've been miserable for 6 months, Zara admitted. Because I applied for your scholarship, and when they told me I qualified, I realized I wanted to tell you first. Because I can't stop thinking about you, and I keep telling myself I did the right thing, but it feels like the most wrong thing possible. You did do the right thing, Jean said gently. My father would have hurt you. You had to protect yourself. But he's gone now, Zara said, and you've changed everything, and I read about the centers, the scholarships, the kids you're helping. They're doing exactly what you said you wanted. Doesn't change the past, Jean said. Doesn't change what I've done. No, Zara agreed. But it shows who you're trying to be, and I think I want to be part of that. If you'll have me, if I haven't destroyed everything by running. Jean pulled her into his arms like he'd been dying without her. I walked past 30 perfect women and froze when I saw you, he said against her hair. That moment changed my life. You changed my life, and I'm not letting you go again. I'm scared, Zara whispered, of how much I love you. I'm terrified, Jean admitted, because you make me want to be better than I am, because I'm pretty sure I was walking through life half dead until you smiled. They stayed on those steps until sunset, talking about everything they'd missed, making plans for a future that finally felt possible. And when Jean finally drove Zara home, he didn't want to let her go. Tomorrow, he asked. Tomorrow, she agreed. And the day after that, and the day after that. Forever, Jean asked. Forever, Zara promised. 1 year later, Zara graduated top of her class with Jean in the front row, crying like a baby. And when she walked across that stage to receive her diploma and the announcement of her full-ride Park Family Scholarship, she looked right at him and smiled, that same smile that had started everything. And Jean knew he'd found something infinitely more valuable than any empire, which was a woman who saw him, really saw him, and loved him anyway. At the reception, Jean got down on one knee in front of everyone, pulled out a ring, and said, You smiled at me and my entire world changed. Marry me, Zara. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never stop smiling. Yes, Zara said through tears. Yes, yes, yes. They kissed while everyone cheered, and when they finally pulled apart, Jean whispered, No regrets. Not a single one, Zara said. Only that I didn't freeze sooner, Jean admitted. Could have had extra time with you. We have forever now, Zara reminded him. Forever, Jean agreed. And I'm going to spend every day deserving you. Somewhere in Manhattan, 30 models were still circulating at galas, still being admired, still being pursued, and not one of them knew that the man who'd walked past them all had found something infinitely more precious than perfection. He found love, real, messy, complicated, beautiful love, the kind that transforms you, the kind that makes you better, the kind that starts with a smile and lasts forever. And if you love Jean and Zara's journey from a frozen moment to forever, smash that like button, drop a comment telling me which moment destroyed you. Subscribe for more stories that will wreck you in the best way. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is smile at a stranger, because you never know whose world you might change. See you in the next one.